Tonight, breaking news, New South Wales COVID cases continue to trend down as Victoria's go up. Anger boiling over in the streets of Melbourne, but police are set to continue a heavy presence across the CBD, even as they're accused of being too extreme in their attempts to stop protesters. It's Sunday, the 26th of September. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
Look at the pool!
Yeah, we just had an earthquake.
The threat of aftershocks looms large in Victoria after the state's biggest earthquake on record. We'll speak to a geology professor to find out how to stay safe in the event of another one and bust a common myth. And Melbourne win the AFL Grand Final for the first time since 1964 to the joy of fans, some who've waited their whole life to see it happen. And to the dismay of Bulldog supporters, our senior reporter is standing by to bring you all the highlights. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Later this hour, Angela Merkel bids farewell to her role as German Chancellor as the country heads to the polls. But first tonight, New South Wales COVID-19 case numbers are continuing to slowly come down, giving hope to people across the state as restrictions continue to be eased. However, it's a very different story interstate, where Victoria has surpassed the record amount of cases they saw last year, the peak not expected until sometime next month. And that's where so-called freedom rallies have been happening and are set to continue, targeting the state government over a temporary shutdown of the construction industry, as well as a number of other issues. Police now being accused by some of going to extreme lengths in their attempts to stop protesters. Reporter Lincoln Holmes begins our special coverage from Melbourne.
3 states and territories, 3 lockdowns, and fines up to $3,000 in Victoria. That's the state where protests have been going for a week against mandatory vaccinations in the construction sector and lockdown restrictions.
Not in East Berlin, we're in Melbourne.
Thank you.
Move on.
Only yesterday, just under 100 people were arrested in St Kilda in the Melbourne CBD after another so-called Freedom Day rally, which had a smaller turnout than previous events earlier in the week. But the actions of Victoria Police are now coming into the spotlight.
Oh!
Authorities are now investigating after a man was filmed being slammed to the ground by an officer at Flinders Street Station. Officers are now also coming under the fire for their use of pepper and capsicum spray, which some have labelled too extreme.
Get off!
Cases in Victoria have now surpassed the record amount seen last year, but on a positive note, the numbers in New South Wales are continuing to trend down.
When we start opening up, it has to be step by step. It has to be done cautiously, and we have to remember that even though people might be fully vaccinated, if you're vulnerable and have other conditions, you can still succumb and get the disease in a serious way or worse.
The hope now is that the rising vaccination numbers can stop people with COVID from going to hospital. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
WA is set to tighten its border restrictions with Victoria, declaring the state extreme risk from this Wednesday. This means they join New South Wales as the only 2 states with that classification, with all others at either low risk or very low risk. Under this category, exemptions for approved travellers are restricted to certain government and specialist or extraordinary circumstances. People must have had at least 1 vaccine dose if eligible and return a negative test result to COVID-19 on arrival. Premier Mark McGowan says the situation in Victoria is heartbreaking, but as the cases there continue to escalate, we need to do everything we can to protect Western Australia while continuing to get as many people vaccinated. The new rules come into effect at 12:01am local time on September 29. NT Chief Minister Michael Gunner has labelled a federal senator from his own party an anti-vaxxer, despite her support for the coronavirus vaccine. Labor's Malandiri McCarthy, who is vaccinated, has told ABC Radio Darwin that while she wants people to get the jab, mandating is something that's not been reached as a country, adding, quote, "One of the biggest criticisms here is that the communication has not been there, not even in the languages appropriately, and that is where I've been pushing people to need to be informed to make the right decisions themselves." Mandatory vaccinations has of course been a divisive topic and still is. It's also the subject of those recent protests in in Melbourne we mentioned just before, including those who, people including those who are vaccinated, saying that while you are free to get it, you should not be forced to. The vaccine is not mandatory in Australia for the general public. However, some state governments have made it compulsory for some industries, including, of course, construction and the education sector. So do you support a no jab, no job policy? Let us know in the comments or on social media by using hashtag 6newsau, or you can email us contact@6newsau.com. Well, Australia has reached a major milestone in our fight against coronavirus. 50% of people aged 16 and over fully vaccinated. SBS reports that our full allocation of Pfizer and Moderna's jabs is set to arrive in October, despite some concerns of a shortfall. Hundreds of thousands of doses are continuing to be administered every 24 hours, especially in New South Wales, or even now seeing kids aged 12 to 15 get the jab right across the country.
To be honest, yeah, I was a bit nervous before it. But the process took like 2 seconds, and then before we even started, we finished. And then, yeah, it was a really easy endeavour.
And you can see our full interview with the team behind COVID Base AU on our YouTube channel right now. Moving away from the pandemic now, it's been 4 days since 3 states were rattled by one of the biggest earthquakes in Australian history. And only now are we beginning to understand how this could happen in a state on an island in the middle of a tectonic plate. Tonight, the threat of aftershocks still looms large. So we've spoken to a geology professor from the University of New South Wales who'll tell you how to stay safe in the event of another earthquake, busting a common myth. And as Chief Reporter Connor Alforcade explains, for other parts of the world, scientists say it will be a lot worse very soon.
I don't know.
Fortress Australia thought it was earthquake immune.
Oh my God.
A 5.9 magnitude earthquake mistaken for shoddy construction.
Is it an earthquake or a structural thing?
And noisy neighbours.
There is. If you're in there, be a little bit quieter.
It hit on Wednesday, was felt in Adelaide and as far away as Sydney.
The earthquake that we had yesterday only was quite big for Australian standards, and I think it's even the biggest in recorded history for Victoria.
Professor of Geology Martin van Kranendonk told 6 News that the Pacific plate is slowly moving under the Australian plate, buckling, pushing it upwards.
And we can see the remnants of that effect with that arc of high ground, the Australian Alps, and that Great Dividing Range.
It's believed that created pressure was released at a deep fault line separating Melbourne and the Alps, causing this. In Melbourne, around 130 kilometres from the epicentre in Mansfield, there was minimal damage.
We dodged a bullet, if you like, that the earthquake did occur in a low populated area.
Because this is what happens when the epicentre is a city.
Earthquake terror. Tonight,
Newcastle, 1989, 13 people perished in Australia's deadliest earthquake, a magnitude 5.4. Those were different times before Australian structural design standards accounted for earthquakes. Today, homes built before the 90s are vulnerable.
Different building standards in the day, and some of the concrete might be a bit old and be microfractured and stuff.
Tonight, the entirety of southeastern Australia is on edge. So far, there have been more than 10 aftershocks. They can and have occurred months and years after the original quake, sometimes hundreds of kilometres away.
What's notorious about earthquakes, they're almost impossible to predict.
While we can't know for sure when or where the next earthquake will strike, we can prepare. Experts say in a quake, act quickly.
Because it happens quickly, and usually it doesn't last that long.
Hide under a table, but there is no need to dash outside.
It would be very rare for an entire building to collapse. Typically what you see is that an outside wall might fall partly away.
In which case, being outside is more dangerous.
Material can come off the tops of buildings, trees can get shaken, and you've got nowhere to hide. The key thing is to be able to get under cover.
Sound advice for shaky times. The San Andreas Fault in California, the Alpine Fault in New Zealand, scientists say both are overdue for the big one, a high-magnitude earthquake which could hit at any moment now. Connor Alforcade, 6 News.
Well, there's been mixed reactions to the South Australian Parliament's changes to the Independent Commissioner Against Corruption, or ICAC. Former State Commissioner Bruce Lander has told the ABC he was as horrified about the legislation as the current ICAC Anne Vanstone was. The changes mean Ms Vanstone can only investigate allegations of corruption and not misconduct. It could also impact police resources. There's also concern at the speed of which it was passed through both the upper and lower house, with support from both the Liberal government and the Labor opposition. Overseas now, Germans right now heading to the polls to vote in parliamentary elections. After 16 years in office as the first female Chancellor, Angela Merkel is not running for re-election. The main parties to look out for are the incumbents, the Conservative Christian Democratic Union, the centre-left Social Democratic Party, who have been in coalition with the Conservatives, the left-wing Green Party, and the far-right Alternative for Germany Party, with the BBC reporting is the country's opposition after being voted in on an anti-immigration platform, but has now fallen to around 10% in the polls. It's just past midday in Germany now. We'll keep you updated with all the latest developments overnight. North Korea has rejected a call from the South to officially end the Korean War. Now, while the conflict may have ended in 1953, it did not end with a peace treaty, leaving the peninsula in a technical state of war. Now, the sister of the country's leader, Kim Jong-un, Kim Yo-jong, says the DPRK is open to ending the war once and for all, as long as South Korea ends its quote-unquote hostile policies. To the US now, where the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has endorsed recommendations for a third dose of Pfizer's COVID vaccine for certain at-risk age groups. But she's gone one step further than the FDA panel last week, saying a booster shot should also be administered to workers in high-risk settings and those in institutional settings. Now, that's raised questions as to the reasoning for it and whether a booster is even needed in the first place. US correspondent Jackson Gosnell has the latest.
Leo, we are monitoring a lot here in the U.S. The big story right now is COVID booster shots. The CDC recently gave the green light to some Americans getting a COVID-19 booster shot. Now, those eligible had to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 with the Pfizer shot 6 months ago, and they must meet certain eligibility requirements. Now, these requirements are being met on what the CDC is describing as the honor system. So they're hoping that only those eligible will actually show up to get their booster shot. Those eligible groups include people 65 and older, as well as people 18 and older with certain underlying health conditions. In addition, those who work in long-term care facilities and those who work in institutional settings like schools are among those who can get a booster shot if they received the Pfizer vaccine more than 6 months ago, or at least 6 months. Now, as for the Johnson & Johnson and the Moderna vaccines, those booster recommendations have yet to be announced, but we're expected to hear them soon. President Biden responded to the news that booster shots were given the green light for certain groups by saying, it was hard to acknowledge he's over 65, but he plans to soon get his COVID-19 booster shot. One thing that the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Lewinsky, mentioned, though, is we can't boost our way out of this pandemic. She says we must keep our priority in getting the unvaccinated their first shot. Right now, vaccinations have been down in the U.S., but presently, about 75% of the eligible population has received at least one dose. Getting kids vaccinated remains a top priority. Right now, there's no vaccine that is approved by the FDA for authorization or even emergency authorization for children who are under the age of 12. Dr. Anthony Fauci says he believes we will get some sort of vaccine for children, whether it's a smaller dosage or something else, hopefully by the end of the year. I'll continue to follow the story from here in the U.S., but for now, I'm Jackson Gosnell. Back to you.
The White House says President Joe Biden will allow investigators of the US Capitol riot access to the records of Donald Trump. Reports say this means the Congressional Committee can examine the role the former president played on January 6. Trump said in a statement that he will fight that for the quote-unquote good of our country and slammed the panel as being made up of highly partisan politicians. To date, over 600 people have been charged criminally for the riot, according to NBC News. To sport now, the Melbourne Demons have won the AFL Grand Final for the first time since 1964, to the joy of tens of thousands of fans, some who've waited their whole life to see it happen. It's also to the dismay of Bulldog supporters who were hoping for their second premiership in 5 years. But regardless of the result, many fans weren't able to see the win in person because of the pandemic. On a normal day in September, the MCG would be packed, but last night it was quiet. Senior reporter Darby Travers has all the highlights from Melbourne.
Well, it's taken 57 years, but the Melbourne Demons are finally AFL premiers. The D's started off strong but trailed to the Western Bulldogs at half-time. From there, though, they kicked goal after goal, 15 of the final 16 of the game. The last time they did win an AFL Grand Final was way back in 1964, and since then it's been a long road to the ultimate glory. Of course, there was heartbreak though for Bulldog supporters who were hoping for the second premiership in 5 years, with the team struggling throughout the second half. The game was played in Perth due to the current COVID situation in Victoria. It started at the late time of 5:15 in WA, which is 7:15 here in the eastern states. The MCG was empty yesterday, which with the Victorian Labor Party highlighting in an ad, blaming Scott Morrison for that, leading to heavy criticism from some on social media.
Darby Travers reporting from Melbourne there. We should probably point out that while we don't usually cover sport, it is a grand final, so probably worth a mention. Now, if you do want us to do more sports reporting, let us know in our anonymous Google form. The link to that is on our website, 6newsau.com, and you can also tell us via email, contact@6newsau.com. Now, moving on to some happy news, depending on who you were supporting last night. A pair of bears has gone viral after taking over an elementary school playground in the US. The bears, presumably a mother and her cub, were filmed climbing and even using the slides in North Carolina. Take a look at this.
You can do this one, honey. It's a smaller one. You can do it. Come on, baby. Oh my gosh. That seriously just happened. Oh my gosh.
Now, school officials labelled the scenes a playground takeover, but added that all students were safely inside when it happened. And now is Ivan and Sarah with what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, Melbourne wins the AFL Grand Final as Perth delivers a blockbuster season-ending decider.
The Royal Show also hits the ground as city slickers line up to get a taste of the country life.
Support mounting on proposals to reduce Fremantle's homelessness, plus Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
All right, thanks both Arvin and Sarah there. Now tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane, partly cloudy, a top of 22, 18 in Sydney, 17 degrees in the nation's capital, Canberra, 20 in Melbourne, 14 and heavy clouds in Hobart, 24 in Adelaide, 34 in Alice Springs, 21 and sunny in Perth, and in Darwin, a warm top of 32. And finally tonight, as Australia and the world continues to move towards so-called COVID normal and moves the focus away from cases and towards deaths, hospitalisations and vaccination rates, 6 News will be doing the same. Now, we will no longer be constantly reporting daily case numbers as breaking news every single morning when they're announced, but right now many people still want to hear them, understandably so. So we'll be doing a daily wrap-up on all of our social media pages with the numbers from Victoria, New South Wales, the ACT and any other state or territory that has cases on a particular day. We'll also be including death numbers from the past 24 hours and any major developments as well. Now, that's for now. We will keep changing up our coverage as the world moves forward and make sure you stay informed with the information that matters. We'd love to hear your feedback, so go to our website, 6newsau.com, where we've got that anonymous Google form. You can tell us how well or poorly we've done at being unbiased and what you want to see more and less of. You can email that to us also, 24/7 contact@6newsau.com. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. And start today with the latest headlines by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Lit. Just search 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.